focus of today's gospel is who's in and who's out. Who among us hasn't been challenged or frustrated in conversation with someone whose perspective is different than theirs? Let's see if we can unearth some good news. Today's gospel opens with Jesus traveling in what we know today as southern Lebanon. Jesus was deep in Gentile territory when the Canaanite woman cried out, "Have pity on me, heal my daughter." And Jesus' disciples repeatedly say, "Get rid of her. She won't leave us alone," because to them, she's disruptive. She isn't Jewish, and she does not matter. Jesus then says, "My mission is to the lost sheep in the house of Israel." Translation: it's okay to ignore anyone beyond Israel's boundaries because they are foreigners. It's okay to exclude them. Strike one. The woman begged, "Help me, Rabbi," and prostrated herself before him. The needs of her precious child took precedence over culture and tradition. And Jesus responds, "It is not right to take children's food and throw it to the dogs." Translation: Jesus insults the woman, refusing to hear her because she is, in his metaphor, one of the dogs. Ouch! Canaanites were pagans and enemies of the Jews. Strike two. Anyone else wondering what's up with Jesus? Pastor Dawn Hutchings, a Lutheran minister, suggests perhaps if we look beyond our carefully constructed images of Jesus as some sort of whiter than white, holier than thou superhero, we might be able to see Jesus the man who was just as much a product of the culture of his time as any of us are. A man who wasn't above resorting to a racial slur when he was up against it. A man who needed to be pushed beyond the boundaries he'd set for himself. A man who couldn't hide his privilege, the privilege granted him by virtue of his gender, his race, his class, or his religion. And the nameless woman's response to being called a dog by Jesus was, "True, Rabbi, but even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table." It is at this point, finally, that Jesus says, "Woman, you have great faith," and heals her daughter. What moved Jesus from seeing the Canaanite woman as a pagan and a dog to seeing this woman's heart and healing her daughter? What was it that opened Jesus's mind to new possibilities? Was it her determination? Perhaps her single-mindedness, her quick wit, her persistent hope. Tensions exist between who belongs and who doesn't. 2,000 years ago and today, people are still excluded because of gender, culture, or religious perspective, and included because they conform to discriminatory standards. The good news is that when confronted the third time, Jesus changed his mind, saw that this woman, with her incessant demands, believed he would heal her, and he did. "You may think we're nothing but dogs, but even dogs are entitled to a few crumbs," Jesus conceded. Yet our gospel includes no apology for how Jesus treated her or what he said, simply an acknowledgement of her faith and healing. What message do we take from this gospel? Perhaps that, like us, Jesus is human and doesn't always get it right the first or second time. Perhaps that all of us operate reflexively from our embedded biases. Let me share Bernadette's story, a story of persistent hope. I learned of Bernadette through my sister who lives in Washington, D.C. In June, she asked me to help her edit Bernadette's resume. In Gabon, a country on the west coast of Central Africa, as a volunteer for a human rights NGO, Bernadette had publicly spoken out on human rights abuses against children. She criticized the government's lack of response to the ritual mutilation and killing of children, and the practice of impunity, exempting politicians from punishment for their involvement in these killings. By the time Bernadette was in her mid-30s, she had been arrested, jailed, tortured, and traumatized. She needed to leave Gabon to protect herself and her daughter. 3 years ago, Bernadette and her 2-year-old daughter, Sandrine Marie, left Gabon and sought asylum in the United States. Bernadette's case caught the attention of Georgetown Law's legal clinic. As I prepared this homily, Bernadette was being prepped as she anxiously awaited her final asylum hearing in federal court in Baltimore. One of the students that she met at the legal clinic referred Bernadette to Holy Trinity Parish in the Georgetown section of Washington. Holy Trinity has an active outreach ministry that supports refugees and asylum seekers. They provide rent and groceries and a host of valuable services. Lives stand in the balance. Sandrine Marie, who is now 5 and since July has been enjoying virtual kindergarten in Silver Springs, Maryland, and Bernadette, her courageous mother, who has lived through trauma and torture most of us will never know. They live together in a rented room, every day at risk of being deported, separated, imprisoned, and tortured. And Bernadette is one of the lucky ones who has a lawyer and a support system. Many others live in fear. In 2020, the US expects to process more than 350,000 new asylum claims. Add that number to the more than 1 million asylum seekers in the United States awaiting adjudication of their claims. 71% of asylum claims in the US are denied. Bernadette's hearing was Thursday. After a 5-hour delay, the good news came. Bernadette received asylum. In our gospel, Jesus realized socially constructed distinctions between people should not dictate our actions. How many women are begging for their children? Each of us here today is a healing presence in our world. We listen, we hear, we respond. We are called to continue to see beyond the artificially imposed categories of who's in and who's out.